Hello and welcome. Today's unit, we're going to be talking about ergogenic aids. What is an ergogenic aid? An ergogenic aid is a substance or phenomenon that are work producing and are believed to improve exercise performance. Now, if you've already taken sport nutrition or are going to take it in the next semester, we'll focus a lot on the nutrients associated with ergogenic aids. So carbohydrate loading, caffeine, creatine supplementation, all of those would kind of fall under that category. And like I said, we'll discuss that in that class. However, today we're going to focus on some of these other physiological mechanisms that would allow us to enhance our exercise performance, including warm-up, hypnosis, stress management, or some psychological techniques, which will be covered in your sports psych class, blood doping, oxygen, breathing, music, and extrinsic biomechanical aids. So let's talk a little bit about some of the research design concerns when we're talking about investigating ergogenic aids. Okay, so number one, the amount of the substance. Too little or too much may show no effect. So again, a lot of these studies need to focus in on what's the appropriate amount of each of these items, whether that be caffeine, carbohydrates, etc. Okay, subjects may be effective in untrained but not in trained subjects or vice versa. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. The value is determined by the subject. So again, if I'm looking at a pre-workout supplement or I'm looking at the use of some sort of ergogenic aid for recovery, well, I need to use the appropriate subject population in order for this to be feasible, in order for this to make sense. And then task, endurance versus short-term events. So again, understanding who would best benefit from this ergogenic aid and making sure we are setting up procedures and tests that are appropriate, that we can kind of utilize as appropriate measures of performance. So understanding those large motor versus fine motor activities, as well as, like we mentioned, understanding the energy systems and how that might play into the type of data that we're collecting. A few more concerns to note. The use, so this may enhance short-term performance, but may compromise long-term performance. So again, kind of understanding what's the chronic effect of the use of this particular item. Placebo, so any lookalike substance containing nothing will improve performance. So again, we think about the psychological aspect of performance for athletes. A lot of times just believing that something will work will actually cause that thing to work. And that's exactly what that placebo effect is. So open placebo participants are openly educated about the treatment. So again, we can utilize those methods to kind of play into our favor in terms of understanding whether or not this ergogenic aid may be effective. We can also set up what's known as double-blind studies, so neither the investigator nor the subject is aware of who's receiving the treatment. That might be common if we're using something like a caffeine or some sort of product that way. If we're looking at the efficacy or the effectiveness of like using foam rolling, we can't necessarily do a double-blind study, right? So again, the subject is going to know whether they have that item or not. So sometimes that's feasible, sometimes not. Okay. What about dietary supplements? Again, just kind of breeze through these and focus more on these in our sport nutrition class. But there's little evidence that exists that dietary supplements could improve performance. Creatine is probably the only supplement that we have seen substantial and consistent improvement in performance across like 6 seconds up to 4-minute duration types of events. So again, think like that anaerobic component. We will see creatine improving performance. A lot of the other supplements, we're not seeing a huge performance enhancement. Okay. Yet 80% of our athletes are using supplements, even though there isn't a whole lot of efficacy surrounding them. Okay. So we've got this Dietary Supplements Health and Education Act of 1994, and this was legislated because there was no regulation over dietary supplements. And again, we're unsure of what these supplements are even including, so they may have some contaminants in them. And again, we know that the use of some of these elements that are kind of unregulated can lead to positive drug tests, particularly if we're working with NCAA athletes that may be, drug tested at any time. And so kind of understanding those elements is very important. Okay, some of the dietary supplements that we see for strength trainers, for coaches, those types of things. So antioxidants, what are their job, or what's their claim? So they're chemicals that are going to protect the cell from oxidative damage caused by free radicals, and their claim is to reduce muscle damage resulting from severe or eccentric exercise. So think like downhill running. You can think, strength training where we're really focused on that slow and controlled movement. Little evidence that performance is enhanced, but some evidence that oxidative damage caused by exercise could be lessened. So with continued training, antioxidants produced by the body may be sufficient if the diet is adequate. So again, I'm always a big fan of just consuming those products as fruits and vegetables. And if we can get those items in the form of fruits and vegetables, that's going to be our best option. Next supplement we'll take a look at quickly, protein or branched chain amino acids. And again, essentially what we're trying to do here is make sure that we are meeting the demands of each of those amino acids so that we can prepare ourselves for protein repair following exercise. Okay. Again, the idea is if the diet is adequate with regular amounts of all the essential amino acids, then this doesn't really give us a whole lot more of a benefit than you could get if you were to just eat healthy. Lysine, arginine, and orthonine are amino acids. Again, same type of gig here. They are costly, not super effective. Again, the idea would be that we're trying to increase the amount of muscle mass through an increase in growth hormone, and not a whole lot of efficacy, as we mentioned. Beta-alanine is amino acid used in synthesis of carnosine. So again, what's carnosine doing? Carnosine acts as a buffer inside the muscle, so it's going to help us to kind of account for, or think of it as like canceling out some of the acidic molecules within the muscle. However, this can lead to like that tingling sensation. So this is found in quite a bit of like pre-workout supplements. And our evidence, no support for high intensity exercise lasting less than 60 seconds, and some for greater than 60 seconds and less than 240 seconds. So again, if we're trying to do something of high intensity, a little over a minute, less than 5 minutes, then this could be beneficial for them. Creatine, as we mentioned, we'll talk more about that in sport nutrition, but we do know that it can improve performance for activities that are anaerobic in nature from somewhere between 6 seconds up to 4 minutes in duration. DHEA is a precursor for testosterone. The idea here is that it's going to enhance testosterone concentration and muscle mass. However, there's no evidence that testosterone strength or muscle mass will be increased, and it is banned by WADA and the Olympic Training Center as well. Okay, andro is also a precursor for testosterone. The idea here being that it will improve testosterone concentrations and muscle mass. However, it is also a banned substance, and we don't necessarily see an effect on testosterone or muscle strength or muscle mass. However, again, you have to remember like the efficacy of the studies. Like there aren't really many studies out there. A lot of this information is just kind of theoretical in nature. Okay. Carnitine is used in fat metabolism, and the idea here is that it's going to enhance our ability to use fats. And again, when we think about evidence of support, no deficiency in athletes, so no effect on metabolic responses to exercise. So again, carnitine isn't a limiter for us in terms of fat metabolism. It turns out that as we become more trained in an endurance world, we're going to kind of naturally upregulate this element. And we, like I said, we naturally have enough of this if we're chronically doing the right things. It's not a limiter for us as it relates to fat breakdown. Okay. What about supplemental oxygen use during exercise? So essentially what we're trying to do here is increase the amount of oxygen that we have in the blood, or the PO2 of the blood. We can sit in what's called a hyperbaric chamber. Hyper means above. So we're looking at an increase in oxygen concentration within this like particular chamber where somebody might sit. And we're going to breathe air under higher pressure. So again, essentially we're looking at a highly concentrated amount of oxygen that's being brought into the body. So normal for us is 20.9%. So 20.9% of the air around us is made of oxygen. And so we're looking to increase that percentage when we use a hyperbaric chamber. There's actually no evidence to support improvement here. We have looked at this as it relates to endurance running on a treadmill and weightlifting. Again, the reason for this is because oxygen coming into our lungs isn't the limiting factor for us as it relates to endurance performance. So it's important that we, take a look at what's happening from a physiological perspective in order for us to understand whether or not this feasibly makes sense. So again, what's happening here? We're going to see an increase in the percentage of oxygen. So again, at the normal atmosphere, we're about 21. It's like 20.9%. Okay. So do we see an improved time to exhaustion? If we're consuming that oxygen during maximal exercise, it is possible that we will improve time to exhaustion. However, during like just rest and during moderate intensity exercise, it really doesn't do anything for us because we're not being limited by the amount of oxygen that we can bring in. Okay, the idea with this is to store oxygen in our blood before the exercise starts. However, we can't really increase oxygen in the blood from a resting level because we're already at like 97%, 98% saturation. So there's only just a tiny amount of increase that we have kind of available to occur when we're at rest. We can increase the amount of oxygen dissolved in the plasma. Again, this can increase from 3 to 21 mils of oxygen per blood. This equates to about 100 extra mils of oxygen total in the body. However, you don't get to like hold on to them, unfortunately, because we have to continue to exhale and get rid of waste products. So oxygen levels will return to normal within just a few breaths. Okay. Little evidence again exists that oxygen breathing prior to exercise would improve performance in short events. It must take place within 2 minutes of the event. So again, we have to have this hooked up and then immediately start the event, like right after we take it off of there, in order for this to have any potential benefit at all. Again, just really not a practical option for athletes when we think about, what it's like to compete. This just isn't realistic. Okay, what about during exercise? Rationale would be to improve muscle hypoxia by delivering additional oxygen. So again, hypoxia means a decrease in oxygen levels. So when we're doing maximal exercise, we will experience what's known as hypoxia. And so the concept here would be that I can kind of account for that or take care of that by increasing the amount of oxygen in the arteries. Okay. However, there's no real increase in oxygen delivery to the muscles, only about a 2 to 5% increase in VO2 max when we are using this during exercise. There is an increased time to exhaustion, however, and some researchers have found this to be substantial, some have not. It is beneficial to athletes who experience desaturation during exercise, such as during maximal exercise. High PO2 slows glycolysis and reduces lactate and hydrogen formation. So again, the idea being that we're able to continue on at that same intensity for a prolonged period of time, but not practical for athletic performance, right? So again, all of these principles are like nice and it sounds great, but what's the practicality of the application of this information to our actual athletes? What about after exercise? So this highly concentrated oxygen? Should we breathe this after exercise? The rationale would be to speed up recovery and be ready for a second bout of exercise. Let's say I'm a wrestler or something and I'm in a tournament where, I have to be ready to come back and wrestle again in a short amount of time, or I'm at a tournament where I have, two different soccer games or whatever the case may be, right? Early results suggest that this could work. However, the subjects knew that they were breathing oxygen. So again, was there a placebo going on in terms of like, would this actually enhance their second performance then? Later research showed no benefits. So no improvement in recovery heart rate, ventilation, or post-exercise VO2 from these studies. So again, this idea of these hyperbaric chambers sounds wonderful, right? But at the end of the day, if we understand what's happening from a physiological perspective, it's easy for us to know that maybe it's too good to be true. Okay, so no improvement in subsequent performance. What about blood doping? So again, when we think about blood doping, this is really going to apply specifically to our endurance athletes. And basically what we're going to do when we blood dope is we're going to take your blood out of your body. We're going to put it into a refrigerator or whatever to hold on to it. And then we're going to wait at least 3 weeks for you to regenerate all the blood that you have just taken out of your body. And then we're going to put it back in. And that's what blood doping is. We're going to increase the amount of blood that you have within your body. Okay, so we're going to complete a transfusion with the subject's own blood. Or you can use a matched donor as well. But I think for the most part, endurance athletes believe, if you believe in this at all, because it is illegal, using your own blood is kind of like a more natural option. And again, by using your own blood, hopefully you have a high concentration of iron and of red blood cells. Okay. So what are the effects of infusion of 900 mils of blood? We're going to see an increase in hemoglobin by 8 to 9%. We see an increase in VO2 max of 4 to 5%, and an increased performance somewhere between 3 to 4%. Okay, so again, a substantial improvement in performance for an endurance athlete that's competing at a very high level. The effects from blood doping can last for 10 to 12 weeks. Again, as we mentioned, this is illegal, and the reason that it's illegal is because it places a lot of stress on the heart, right? If I throw in 900 mils of blood just like this into my body, my heart now has to account for this addition of all this blood. And again, it's going to produce a lot of strain on the heart in order for it to kind of take care of that particular blood. Another option for endurance athletes, also illegal, is EPO or erythropoietin. And again, basically what this is it's a prohormone, and it's going to stimulate the release of the hormone let me back up. So we can take something that's going to increase the release of erythropoietin, which is a hormone that stimulates red blood cell production. There, I got it. All right. And again, the idea with this is that it can allow us to naturally produce more red blood cells without seeing as substantial of a change in blood volume. Okay, so while we are increasing the amount of red blood cells that we have, it's a little bit more gradual. So we think it's a little bit, dare I say, healthier than using just regular blood doping. But it is illegal. As we said, we've seen this lead to death in athletes because essentially what happens as I increase the amount of red blood cells that I have, my blood can become very viscous. Again, the major negative here is that it's placing more strain on the heart and puts us at risk for a heart attack. We can use something known as the athlete's biological passport, and this is something that we can use at the professional level to kind of keep track of some of these physiological markers throughout an athlete's life. So the biological passport is a process of tracking national or international level professional athletes. and it's going to monitor a group of biomarkers to determine if the athlete is competing ethically or unethically. So again, we're not necessarily concerned with what those levels are today, but we're interested in how those levels change over time. And are there any outliers in terms of what we would consider a normal standard deviation away from kind of whatever their median value or their average value might be for each of these biomarkers? Okay, so the athletes will serve as their own point of reference or their own control in this situation. So WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, has created several categories for these biological passports. Hematological variables include like red blood cell counts, hematocrit, that type of stuff. We can also look at steroid profiles, so testosterone, estrogen, and looking at the balance of those two hormones, and endocrinological aspects. So again, understanding like EPO levels and IGF-1, so insulin-like growth factor, and understanding what's happening from a hormone perspective. Also, when we think about this as it relates to future directions, this is freaking nuts to think about, but gene doping. So again, being able to provide people with genetic predispositions to be successful in sport. So again, actually a research project that I'm working on now in collaboration with Stanford University is creating a genetic profile of elite endurance athletes. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to collect genetic data on 10,000 elite endurance athletes all over the world. And we're looking for commonalities in these people as it relates to genetic factors. And again, the last time I presented and spoke about this research project, which would have been, I think, a couple months ago, someone did ask me, like, what will they do with this information? Will they use this to be able to genetically modify or clone elements of these people's genetics so that we can build better athletes? Which is kind of scary to think about, honestly, but definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. I think probably the more logical first step is understanding what are those elements and then being able to screen children at an earlier age so that we can understand what are their potentials in terms of success in the future and how do we shape their childhood, their early adult lives so that they are at the best possible capacity to be successful. We think about anaerobic performance. Again, one of our major emphasis will be on buffering hydrogen released from the muscle. So again, we can think about, the production of hydrogen as that acidic waste product from those anaerobic pathways. And we can use a blood buffer known as sodium bicarbonate to kind of cancel out the acidic molecules associated with the hydrogen, improves performance of 1 to 10 minutes in duration or repeated bouts of high intensity exercise. However, we see no benefit in tasks less than 1 minute because that hydrogen accumulation isn't substantial enough for it to negatively impact performance at those levels. Again, we have to understand what an optimal dose is here, and we're looking at 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight with 1 liter of water. We do believe that there is evidence for some placebo effects. However, we also know that some of these larger doses can lead to side effects such as diarrhea and vomiting. Okay, just a snippet about caffeine. Again, we'll focus more on this in your sport nutrition class, but an ergogenic effect of caffeine are substantial. So we can see an improved performance at the muscle or the nervous system, as well as delivery of fuel to the muscle. So we're going to see elevated blood glucose and an increase in fat utilization. So metabolically, it enhances things. A decrease in perception of fatigue and lower RPE during prolonged exercise. We'll see a variable effect and we'll also see a dose response. So again, it's possible that more is better to a certain extent. We also see a fair amount of individuality in terms of caffeine tolerance and how much caffeine is necessary in order for performance to be enhanced. Again, effects may be diminished by regular users. Some other considerations to think about when we're considering using caffeine are the potential side effects. So insomnia, diarrhea, anxiety, irritability, diuretic effect, particularly if we're consuming coffee, and causing dehydration in that regard. So again, lots of things to kind of think about if we're considering using caffeine as a performance enhancer. This kind of shows us the caffeine content of several different items. So again, coffee is around 100 milligrams of caffeine per cup. We see tea being a little bit lower on the spectrum, but still giving us a substantial dose. Excedrin has about 130 milligrams of caffeine, so that's another thing to keep in mind if we're, taking that because of a headache or whatever. Does that keep us awake then at night? Caffeine is supposed to be beneficial for people experiencing migraines and headaches and that type of stuff. Okay. Root beer has a little bit of caffeine, but then you can see Mountain Dew. I think I feel like I was always taught like that Mountain Dew was like the worst one in terms of caffeine, like growing up. However, coffee's double that, right? Coffee is around 100, we said. Well, Mountain Dew is only about 55 milligrams versus a Red Bull is closer to 80. Okay, again, you can see some of those non-prescription drugs as well, Midol being one, where again, we are maybe potentially coping with headache. That can be kind of an issue, menstrual cycle side effects. So again, maybe Midol is going to be beneficial because of that caffeine product. So again, more to come on that in sport nutrition, but now I want to kind of take a look at an example of a mechanical ergogenic aid in a sport such as cycling. And essentially what we want to do in the world of cycling is produce as little drag or as little resistance as possible. Again, if are any of you that are familiar with swimming, swimming is the same setup. We want to be as aerodynamic as possible as we move through the water, creating the least amount of drag that we can in order to continue to propel ourselves forward in the most efficient way. Okay, so again, faster speed in cycling will result in greater drag, and power is a product of drag and velocity combined. So again, what is my velocity and how much drag or how much air resistance do I need to overcome in order to move forward as fast as possible? So we can reduce drag by doing a lot of different things. We can talk about body position, equipment and clothing, and then race strategy known as drafting. And all these factors will kind of work together in order for us to potentially improve our cycling performance. So let's take a look. Okay, so first thing we wanted to kind of talk about, again, I'm going to nerd out a little bit because I'm a triathlete and I'm big into cycling. So I thought this was kind of a fun example. But we think about the frame of our bikes. Okay, if we have a teardrop shape, this will produce less drag than a round frame. So again, essentially we are trying to create the smallest or the most rounded surface on the front where that air is going to hit first in order for us to reduce the drag. We also want to have a carbon fiber frame because it's a stiffer material. It's also lighter weight. And that's going to allow us to optimize our power transfer as opposed to like aluminum or something a little bit heavier like steel, those types of products. We can also look at what's going on in the wheels as well. So we can have round spokes that produce drag, or we can have what's known as arrow spokes. So arrow spokes are going to be flattened. We can also have a flat disc wheel where we have 3 to 4 spokes of carbon fiber, and those are going to produce the least amount of drag. So I think I have an image that I can kind of explain here coming up, but thinking about these elements and how that relates to performance is actually really important in cycling in terms of kind of maximizing what we would call our power output or our wattage in terms of how does that translate into speed? How does that translate into performance? Okay, we can also look at the tires as well. So again, we want to have high pressure tubular tires that have a low rolling resistance. However, the higher pressure tires, the smoother those tires are, the greater the likelihood of those tires slipping out and maybe, having a crash if it's a wet day, if the ground is wet in any regard. So again, it's trying to find that balance between kind of like a rougher, we call a gator skin. It's kind of like a almost like a little bit of a sticky edge to it versus a smooth flat tire. Makes a big difference in terms of that rolling resistance. Also the components, including like the handlebars, the seat posts, low drag cranks. So again, understanding those different elements that are going to play into our body position will be really important in determining our success. Okay, so again, body position, 75 to 80% of the drag is produced by the cyclist body. So creating a aerodynamic position will reduce our drag 30 to 35%. Also, we want to wear tight fitting clothing and what's called an aero helmet. And an aero helmet is going to be like rounded in the front, just like I described how we would want the frame of the bike to be rounded in the front. We can also have carbon fiber helmets, and that's going to be very lightweight and allow us to minimize our drag. Our cycling shoes and pedals make a difference as well. So we can get carbon fiber plated shoes that will allow us to be as light as possible by providing a sturdy enough surface so that we can transfer that power from the foot into the pedal. Drafting, so depending on the type of race, we could have draft legal or draft illegal events. But essentially, drafting allows that lead cyclist to take the brunt of the drag. Okay, so essentially, when we draft, somebody's going to get directly behind somebody in front. We can produce what's called a draft line, where we're riding in a pack, where we have several people in a line. And again, ideally, you want to be about second from the back to kind of minimize your drag and minimize your effort that you have to put in to kind of stay with the group. Now, in cycling races, we'll kind of rotate through, right? So again, there's kind of like some unwritten rules in cycling where if you have a pack of people, those people will rotate through who's kind of leading and who's taking that drag in order for us to kind of almost work in an interval fashion, right? So we're kind of working in intervals in order for us to kind of stay together and move as fast as we possibly can. So here you can see some different positioning. So here you can see what's called our standard aero position. So from this position, the hands are forward. That person is kind of leaned down instead of being upright. So this position is a little bit better if I'm by myself in comparison to this position. And the reason that this position is better is because I've got my head tucked in. Look at his helmet. His helmet's not as aerodynamic as this helmet. This helmet is producing very little drag because the edge of the helmet goes right onto this person's back. Now, you have to be able to sustain this position in order for us to maximize the benefits here. Because if this person needs to pop up out of what we call aero position, right, that's going to produce more drag. So you have to be strong enough and comfortable enough to be able to maintain this position here. Okay. Now, the biggest con with this is when I have my hands out like this, I'm not able to really steer very well. So this isn't safe when you're riding in groups. If we're riding in groups, this is your better option in terms of bike setup and hand positions, because now I still have control over my handlebars and I can manipulate where I need to go within that group setting in order for us to stay safe, in order for us to maneuver our way through the bike course. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? The tires. So here you can see these are known as disc wheels, and these disc wheels are completely covered with like a carbon, it's like almost like a poster material is how I would describe it, almost like a foam in there. And actually these tires weigh a little bit more than these, but the benefit here is they are more aerodynamic as I try to cut through the air. This tire setup is going to be better if it's windy though. So if it's windy and you're a small person and the wind catches this big old flat disc, it's going to whoosh you around. Okay, so in this position with these tires, you better be a very good bike handler and you better not have a windy day in order to kind of maximize the potential here. So again, I know this is a little probably outside of your comfort zone, but I'm just super excited about sharing a little bit about my sport in terms of how we set ourselves up for success from an ergogenic perspective. And again, equipment is everything. And that's true in several sports. So this isn't just true in cycling. I just thought this was a cool example. They had this example in the textbook. So I was like, yes, let's talk about it in terms of, how can we set these people up for success. This kind of shows you what's happening when we look at drafting. So again, reduction in VO2. If I have one rider with me, okay, I can reduce my workload by a little over 20%. Isn't that crazy to think about? I can do 20% less work at that same pace. And that's true whether it's one rider or four riders. So again, up to four riders, we're going to get about a 25% potential reduction in VO2 needed in order to like maintain that intensity or maintain that pace, I should say. So that's kind of cool to think about. Now, again, the rider makes a difference as well. If that person is like 100 pounds and 5'3", they're not going to do a whole lot for you. If you've got a 6'3" guy that's 195 pounds or whatever, right? Then he's going to block a lot of wind. He's going to block a lot of the draft. So again, that does make a difference, that variance in terms of what that rider's like, in terms of how much of that VO2 I can reduce. A pack is going to reduce our workload substantially more. So up to 40% for a pack. If I were to draft a vehicle, look at that, we're looking at about 60% reduction there. So again, this whole concept of drafting makes a huge difference in cycling. We can use that same concept in swimming as well. In order for us to kind of reduce that drag a little bit in running. Not as substantial though in terms of VO2 cost or energy cost in running as it is compared to cycling. In other sports, we think about some of these elements, lightweight equipment such as bats, tennis rackets. We can think about carbon fiber and some of those elements. Shoes are huge, right? So again, we think about all the different types of shoes that we've developed for all these different types of sports and how that can allow us to enhance our performance in some regard related to whatever the needs are of that particular sport. Swim skins are another example. When we compete in swimming, it's a carbon fiber, really tight item that's going to create the smallest amount of drag possible in order for that swimmer to move as efficient as possible through the water. And then also uniforms can be ergogenic as well. So again, something tighter, if I need to move through the air, is going to be more beneficial than anything baggy. What about the benefits of a warm-up? So again, our warm-up is going to produce physiological and psychological changes, including an increase in muscle temp, arousal, and focus on event. So warm-up is beneficial not only for our physical readiness, but also our psychological readiness as well. Warm-up activities should be very similar to performance. They should be directly related. Okay, so again, selecting elements or drills in that warm-up that are going to be very specific to what that athlete is doing in the game. We can also complete a general warm-up as well, where we're just really focusing on increasing heart rate, increasing body temperature, and those types of things. So what are the warm-up recommendations? If it's short term, so we're looking at less than 10 seconds of maximal effort, we need approximately 40 to 60% of our VO2 max for 5 to 10 minutes, followed by a 5-minute recovery. And the idea here is we want to potentially reduce the high energy phosphates. Okay, so again, with looking at a short anaerobic performance, we need to do 5 to 10 minutes of kind of what I would consider like moderate intensity work, and then we can take a look at what we would do specifically to kind of prep for that. Okay, but we do need a 5-minute recovery following that. For intermediate term, so between 10 seconds and greater than 10 seconds, but less than 5 minutes. We need 60 to 70% VO2 max for 5 to 10 minutes, followed by a 5-minute recovery. And the goal here is begin that performance with a slightly elevated VO2. So again, we kind of already want to be a little bit, working at that intensity in order for us to truly be ready. If we're looking at long term, so again, greater than 5 minutes, we want to start with a similar aerobic warm up of 5 to 10 minutes. And we don't want to do too much because that could potentially deplete muscle glycogen or increase thermal strain depending on the environmental conditions. So again, kind of take away from these warm-up recommendations, we need 5 to 10 minutes of aerobic work, right? Again, no matter what the competition is, that's kind of a good way to start our warm-up before we move into more sport-specific types of things. Okay. Stretching. So again, we can think about stretching in its own entity. We can also think about stretching kind of like at the end of that warm up. So stretching benefits improve, increase joint flexibility, increase muscle tendon compliance. Also understanding kind of that range of motion that's functional for these athletes. So improving functional range of motion is important. The idea here being that a lot of people believe that stretching can reduce our injury risk, stretching will reduce our soreness. We can't necessarily say that's true or not true. So again, we think about the research here. It'd be difficult for us to truly make that claim. Again, I'm sure you've heard that, and I'm sure that's something that maybe you even tell your athletes, and it makes sense theoretically, but we don't have a whole lot of research to support that. Certainly there's nothing wrong with stretching. Like stretching wouldn't be negative for us in really any regard. So stretching is always a good option, maybe as part of a warm up and also as part of a cool down or kind of standalone item as well. What about myofascial release? So here you can see a Theragun or a foam roller. Again, these are both common practices used by athletes before exercise, after exercise. And again, what are the benefits here? The idea is we're trying to loosen up that muscle, right? So again, using a foam roller before exercise, I think is, a pretty common option. And then I see a lot of people use like a Theragun after exercise. The idea with the foam roller is we're trying to activate the stretch receptors within the muscle and allow them to kind of relax. This is really good for things like such as like the IT band or areas that are going to be more difficult to kind of activate in other ways. So that's a great option there. With the Theragun, the idea is really similar with that percussion massage. The idea is we want to stimulate those receptors inside the muscle to allow them to kind of relax. So we see these both being pretty effective in terms of allowing us to enhance performance, decrease soreness, that type of stuff. Again, is there a lot in the research that really supports that? Not a lot, but again, is placebo a strong thing? Yes, absolutely. Does it make your athlete feel better? If it does, then yeah, let's use it. Compression is another option. These are an example of like compression sleeves and compression boots. I've done research for both of these types of things. So I did a research project using features compression socks, and we looked at performance and recovery with the use of the socks, and we saw the socks not only improved aerobic performance, but they also improved recovery for our athletes as well in terms of looking at like their lactate levels the day after they wore the socks. So again, these can be really beneficial, particularly in the lower extremity as we're trying to remove waste and that sort of thing. The boots, I love the boots as well. Did a study for Normatec compression boots. And essentially, if you've never worn these, I love it. It's amazing. So basically, like it starts down here and it's going to create a compressive force that's going to kind of pulse up through the whole leg, and then it goes back down to the bottom and it kind of starts over. So it's kind of like a ripple effect, but a slow motion ripple. So it's like 90 seconds to get through one cycle. And the idea, think of it as kind of like the combination of compression and a massage at the same time. And the idea is we're trying to remove waste products. So I've found these to be super helpful when we're doing concurrent things. So like at a track meet, if you had two events, can we wear these between events, and would that allow us to enhance recovery? We think so. So again, this is a great option for those types of athletes. Heat therapy, again, we just finished up our unit on environmental conditions, and I said I would mention both heat and cold therapy. So this is a picture of an infrared sauna. I just finished up doing a study with the use of an infrared sauna for recovery and endurance athletes. And the idea with the infrared rays is those infrared rays are supposed to be able to penetrate through the muscle and be able to break up muscle damage that's occurring within that muscle mass. Again, we saw positive findings, nothing statistically significant with the use of the infrared sauna, but we did see a trend towards an improvement in performance and recovery with the use of the infrared rays. Now, I think it would probably honestly be more beneficial for like our anaerobic athletes or people that are lifting, we find that to be potentially more beneficial. However, I haven't done that study yet. And the other thing that's important when using like the infrared sauna is consistency. So it's not enough to just do it one time. The idea being that we need to kind of consistently be utilizing the method in order for it to have a positive and more substantial effect. And then lastly, when we talk about cold therapy, again, this is a big buzz term for a lot of people right now doing these cold plunges. The idea here is we're going to try to reduce inflammation in a muscle, and that's supposed to help us with recovery in that regard. So really, anytime after we do exercise, this would be beneficial. And again, it also is supposed to be good because it's going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system and kind of give us that shock factor. That's supposed to be good. I personally don't want anything to do with getting in cold water. Like sounds awful to me. If you told me I had to do this, I would probably not show up for that. So I think it really depends on the athlete. Maybe the sauna would be better suited for somebody that has, opposition to a cold plunge. But I've had athletes tell me they'd rather do the cold plunge than sit in a sauna. So I think a lot of it does have to do with the athlete and what they're willing to do and how consistent they're willing to be. So again, those are just a couple examples of ergogenic aids that are pretty common in the world of sport. Hopefully this was a good intro to you. If you do have questions about specific products, ergogenic aids, I'm happy to talk in more detail about those. Hope you have a great day.